I'm delighted that today our webinar is hosted by the Right Honourable Lord Andrew Stunnel. He's going to be talking to members about a green recovery post-coronavirus and the opportunity that this provides for the home improvement and refurb maintenance and improvement sector to step forward and lead the way for a healthier and more resilient homes for everyone. Oh no.
Well, if I can start, first of all, the introductions are a little bit frightening because I've realised that some of the things I'm going to say are really cross the boundaries of the different skills that you've all got. So you'll have to kind of stick with me till the end and see where I might be going with this. There's always the option, of course, to with Zoom simply to mute me and go and have a little chat till the end. But to be serious about this, Anna gave me the topic of green recovery post-coronavirus, and I've chosen to really do it in two parts. First of all, to say something about the overall reasons why we should have any sort of green recovery and what that might mean. And secondly, to look at the implications for specifically the UK domestic housing market. So I'm sorry for Les in South Africa. We won't really be commenting on the South African situation, and if you like, the international perspective won't really be there. And at the end, we're going to have a short worked example to show exactly where I'm coming from and very much where I hope to go to. So first of all, people have got very different ideas about what recovery itself actually means. Everybody agrees it's not going back to normal. But for instance, does it mean that fewer people will travel because of Zoom? Or does it mean that more people will get out of public transport because of their concerns about public health? In other words, will there be less cars on the road or will there be more cars on the road? Will there be less CO2 or more CO2 as a consequence of getting back to normal? And of course, if you're President Trump, you think the right way to get back to normal is to lift the environmental rules and, in quotation marks, get America back to work. On the other hand, if you're the state of California, which has a GDP larger than India, you are tightening up the environmental rules to take advantage of the clear skies and the breathable air. So in other words, in America, there are two forces pulling in opposite directions as well. Now, in the UK, at least, there is a united political vision of what we're aiming for. It's unusual, perhaps, and there's only really marginal differences about when we're due to arrive. So that if you go back to the general election in December last year, it seems like quite a few years ago, but it's only last December, the three main parties had commitments to zero carbon Britain. The only thing different was the dates. The Conservatives said they wanted to do it by 2050, the Liberal Democrats by 2045, and Labour by 2040. So it's only an argument about timescale, and the Conservatives won, and therefore the 2050 deadline remains already locked into legislation. And clearly, the fact of the matter is that far from slowing down, the opposition is likely to be pushing for things to go faster rather than slower. And the government has an additional reason for wanting to show itself as really green and really getting on the job, because it was due to be hosting in Glasgow this autumn COP25, the next international round to ratchet up the world's preparations for a zero carbon world. And the host nation, whoever the host nation is, always tries to bring out a whole bunch of new and exciting initiatives to show that their country in particular is ahead of the curve. So in other words, all the political momentum in the UK is pushing in one direction, and there's no significant differentiation between the different regions and nations of the UK. So Scotland and Wales have similar objectives and ways to do it. However, having a vision about the end product doesn't necessarily mean that you've got a unanimous view about the route to delivering that. And it's not a party political point, it's an attention span point, really. Policymakers have traditionally, when talking about reductions in CO2 emissions, focused immediately on transport. Transport is responsible for, say, 15% of our carbon dioxide emissions in the UK. And very much less often is there real focus on the built environment, which contributes over 30%, probably nearer 35% of our CO2 emissions. And of course, a large chunk of that is CO2 emissions from homes. And when policymakers do focus on the built environment and focus on homes, they're very often actually talking about new build because it's kind of sexy and whizzy. Zero carbon home sounds a really good thing to go for, and it certainly is. I spent 2 years as a junior minister in the Department of Communities and Local Government during the coalition. Perhaps I forgot to say I'm a Liberal Democrat, so I was a rather unexpected addition to the government ranks. And one of my portfolio briefs was really to see, well, to push forward and deliver zero carbon homes. And we got it to the point where it was due to be introduced in 2016. But then you'll remember that the Conservatives pulled the plug on that in 2015. So I certainly am committed to the idea that zero carbon homes is a really good thing and that we ought to get on with it. And as the discussion beforehand, when people were introducing themselves, shows, actually, despite pulling the plug on zero carbon homes, we've actually got with the new home standard something which is quite quickly pushing us back in that direction. But to some extent, that is a sideshow. In a really good year in the UK, we build 250,000 homes, less usually. There are political targets to do more, but they're very, very hard to achieve. But actually, there are already 23 million existing homes. Actually, that's a replacement rate of the homes we've got about once every 95 years. So the homes on the straight mathematics, we've got enough. You can't expect a home built now to be demolished and rebuilt for another 95 years. Actually, the figure is longer than that, quite a lot longer than that, because what we're doing is adding to the building stock rather than replacing existing stock. And so, particularly in the owner-occupied sector, a more sensible figure to use for replacement rates is 150 years. So by 2050, which is 30 years away, the best guess is that we shall still have 20 million homes that are already built now at this minute, and we will have added to them about 6 million new, hopefully zero carbon homes. Now, of course, the virus and this year's economic news may well change that, but that seems to me the framework. So I want you to do, or just think about back of the envelope stuff for a moment. Let's say that we plan to say £10,000 per home, those 20 million homes cutting CO2. Well, £10,000 isn't a lot. You won't get a zero carbon home from an Edwardian terrace for £10,000, of course not. But let's just stick with that figure for the moment and see where it takes us. That would mean that we would be spending £200 billion over 30 years. And to achieve it, we would need to have about 700,000 upgrades each year at an annual additional cost of about £7 billion. This is new. We're not doing it at the moment, so this is new money that has to be spent to achieve that. Now, about £4.5 billion of that will be new spending in the owner-occupied sector. It's got to be, because the owner-occupied sector is the largest slice and part of it. Now, of course, these are big numbers, and one thing that the current crisis has taught us is that enormously large numbers no longer seem to terrify anybody. I mean, I know, because we've got Corgi on the as part of this conference, that Some of my figures are likely to be challenged on the grounds of accuracy, but according to me, there's 1.5 million boilers which are installed each year. There's about 1 million homes which are bought and sold each year. And something which sometimes is missed is that the combined purchase price of those homes will be £200 billion, a coincidental figure. And that's every year for 30 years, 1 million homes being bought and sold at the average price of homes in the UK at the moment. And about 500,000 homes will have new rented tenants coming in. Now, if you did that, £10,000 worth of improvement in 23 million homes over 30 years, you'd actually reduce the emissions from the housing sector by about a third, contributing to a 10% reduction in the UK's CO2 emissions. It would cut fuel bills, it would eliminate fuel poverty, it would improve residents' well-being, and it would also reduce admissions to the NHS for heart and lung cases. And it's altogether an absolute no-brainer. And at first sight, it's a mystery why it hasn't all happened years ago, in the way that it has happened in the Nordic countries and in Germany, for instance. And this gets to the hard bit. There are 3 big areas of failure that have interacted to create the delivery problems: the market, the government, and the industry. So if I talk about the market first, owner-occupiers are the biggest slice of the market. And I just ask you, what happens now when you move? What do you actually look for, whether you're renting or buying? But let's take buying just for the moment. You're going to look at the kitchen, you're going to look at the bathroom. And if you're going to spend any money, it will be on a new kitchen or a new bathroom. Or possibly it's not quite the right size or shape for you, so maybe you'll have an extension or you'll have a loft extension. One of the last things even you will be looking at is, has it got thermostats? What's the state of the boiler? What's the insulation? So we've got a market disconnect because people are not looking for the right things when they're buying or renting. And the reason is a strange one. It's the payback period. And my question to those who say payback is really important to people taking decisions on this is to say, well, what was the payback period for the last new kitchen that you got? The reason you got a kitchen was not because of the payback period, it was because it's nice to have, and perhaps your partner was pestering for it to be included in the package. And I ask a similar sort of question about the car that you've got. Almost certainly you've got a pretty good idea of what the mileage, miles per gallon of your car is. And indeed, car companies compete to get the right figure, the most attractive number. And it's something on which you may well have bragging rights if you've got a hybrid car. But if I was to ask you, what's the MPG of your house? You would find it a much harder question to answer. It's really only for nerds like me to worry about the MPG of the house. And yet your house, almost certainly, your house is emitting more carbon in the year than your car. So we really just need to see the market failures there in 2 different places and consider how we actually reframe the debate so that just as a kitchen is desirable, so is a low energy, high performing house. At the minute, there is no price premium for buying a new zero carbon home. It's a problem that developers have been struggling with, some of them not very hard, but the reality is that if you build a row of zero carbon homes, you will not be able to sell them for a higher price. If you sell a car with, I don't know, 2 turbochargers, you can certainly charge a premium price. I won't go into the PRS or the private rented sector or the social sector because they're smaller versions of the same thing. The social sector, in fact, has got quite a good performance because it's egged on by the government and is used as a test bed. And of course, the landlords on the whole have got a more ethical approach to the job they're doing. What about government? I seem to have minimized everybody by mistake. Let's try that again. Yeah. since the early 2000s, there have been good intentions by governments of all political flavours, some progress, but there's clearly a lot more to be done. Labour introduced the energy performance certificate regime, and at that time there were going to be inspectors. It was going to be quite a hard-edged proposal. However, they shrank away from that, and in the event we've only got a semi-voluntary EPC system for the domestic sector. The coalition, great exponents of the Green Deal. I certainly was. It was something that the Liberal Democrats put on the table as part of the coalition. That was supposed to be at the point of sale or the point of letting, so that actual upgrading had to happen and there will be financial support to do so. It shrank just as the previous proposals had, so that it was not compulsory, and of course the Treasury managed to invade it and put a repayment rate on was actually for many people worse than they could have got from their mortgage provider. The Conservatives started by cancelling the Green Deal and scrapping the introduction of zero carbon homes, but they have got themselves back on track, as I said before, with the energy company obligations and a whole range of things which we've already just hinted at in terms of the new home standard. And then the thing I'm going to spend a little bit of time on, the next shove forward, PAS 2035, and of course PAS 2030. I'm hoping that you're all familiar with this, but you'll certainly wish you were by the end of the session. And it was a product of the Peter Bonfield review, and they're the regulations that put in place a new regime that accepts that not everything can always be done at once, that sets out to make sure that when energy performance improvements are done on a property, they're part of an overall plan, such that there's a planned sequence of work over time, and where one thing doesn't have to be ripped out to put in another. Just as important, of course, improvements do actually improve things and not have unintended consequences. And the mantra is a whole house approach. And the logic of Bonfield is fabric first. You all know this. I hope you do anyway. Before you do anything else, fix what you've got. That's the key thing. It's not just good science, but it's good for people's pockets as well. It's a regime that says do the most cost-effective things you can first, and that those will always be to reduce your energy use and leave the fancy stuff like heat pumps, solar power and a wind turbine until you've done all the practical stuff on everything else first. Now then, the scary thing is that this isn't just an idea or a concept, an aspiration. It comes into force on the 30th of June 2021. And from that point, access to public funds for improving energy performance will need to be linked to a long-term program of steps for that home, drawn up or overseen by a retrofit coordinator. And in fact, that date was delayed to that date. So the introduction was delayed to that date to allow for more training and upskilling, which I hope means that you're all up for it, and we won't need any Q&A because you'll just be telling me exactly how you're going to move ahead and make this happen. So now we come to the third bit of my third barrier. There was the market, there's the government of different types, and there's the industry. And I need to say, by way of an alibi, that I spent 20 years in the construction industry myself, including time on small-scale refurbishments and extensions, mostly in the retail sector, actually. And that ended 35 years ago. And the worrying thing is that many of the problems and issues which beset the trade at that time are still with us. Skill shortages, quality control, cost and time management are still big issues for the whole industry. And whilst it's absolutely true that site safety and welfare are hugely better, some significant cultural issues do remain. We've got fragmented and silo working. We've got different silos around the table today representing different parts of the home improvement industry. And how we bring those together to make a coherent package is going to be part of what I'm going to finish up by saying. And there's a very slow rate of innovation and very little continuous development of skills. And evidence from surveys shows that, for instance, few contractors at site level have got enough people with the practical understanding of air tightness or cold bridging to deliver a right first time outcome. Never mind whether they know which side of the insulation the vapor barrier should really have gone. Sadly, Grenfell shows that it's not limited to the improvement of energy, but even what quite basic things like fire safety just do not get the skilled, detailed attention that they should have. Now, one particular result of that is that at the micro level, a private client who wants some work done to bring up his home to spec doesn't usually have an informed awareness of what techniques or options might be available to him, is going to struggle to find how they can be one of the 700,000. Now, the most likely time to commission an energy performance upgrade is, of course, at the point of property purchase, when it's the time, of course, when people buy that kitchen. So the industry, the home improvement industry, is geared up to provide kitchens and bathrooms and loft extensions and conservatories and double glazing and triple glazing. But I actually think you're missing out on claiming your share of the £4.5 billion which needs to be spent upgrading those 20 million homes over the next 30 years. That's not just spread out over 30 years, that's each year of the time to reach that target. Now, a whole house approach, which is what's coming next year, means that it ought to be the case that the industry could say to people like me, to another 699,999 people, show us your EPC, and we can work through that with you, giving you prices and timescales. We've got a qualified retrofit coordinator who can sign it all off, who can come back in 6 months' time to check that your home's performance really has improved as we promised. We've got a payments plan to go with it, and you don't have to worry about integrating all the different bits of that improvement process. We are going to give you that package. Now, that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to why 2 months ago I visited the Nightingale Hospital in London. It really is an incredible tribute to the construction industry that when I visited, it was the Future Build exhibition, and within 2 months it was turned into, well, within about a fortnight actually, it was turned into a hospital for 4,000 people. And I'm going to mention Future Build, its last use before it became the hospital. Sad person that I am, I spent a day and a half there. I collected brochures like a college student, and I looked at all the new things I could find to look at. I looked at Worcester Bosch's dual fuel boiler. Methane and hydrogen is what's coming down the track. I hope that when they get in, I shall get start to come in probably in 2 or 3 years' time. I hope that the installers will be a little bit more positive about it than the British gas fitter who fitted a condensing boiler in our flat about 6 months after they were introduced, who opened the packet in the kitchen and said, "Why on earth have you bought one of these? It would have been much cheaper to get the old type." Of course, that is really the difference between an industry that's selling its product and an industry which is reluctantly installing its product. Let's move on a bit, shall we? I think the time's come to have a worked example of what I've been talking about. And I did promise Anna that I would wind you up. So here goes. My wife and I are shortly, subject to lockdown, downsizing to a single-story house with an energy rating of F35, which is abysmal. from a 3-story townhouse with an energy rating of C75. And according to the EPC calculation, our fuel bills will rise from £3,500 to £4,400 over the next 3 years, although the house is actually only 40% in its area of our present one. F35 is such a low standard that it was actually illegal to let it out to a tenant, but we're purchasing, so that's okay. So now we get to the really difficult part of the thing. Let's see if my grasp of the technology is good enough to show you the first of my slides. Well, it's
there you go. Well done.
Yeah, well, okay. I
Excellent.
don't know if you've got the full. I don't know if you've got full flavour there, but you can see what it is. So you've seen thousands like this. I call it a single-story house. My wife insists it's a bungalow. I just say that it's not in a conservation area. It hasn't got historic windows. It's not listed. There's nothing fancy or exceptional about it at all. So there's no excuses, I would suggest. If you can't fix this one, then I suggest you're in the wrong trade association in the nicest possible way. Right, let's see if we can find the other one. With a bit of luck, you've got a little piece of an EPC in front of you. That's excellent. Okay. Well, what this EPC shows is that I could get my fuel bills down from 449 to 2,031. This is the way it's done is over 3 years. So I could halve my fuel bills by upgrading this single-story house. I could get an energy rating of 80 if I do all the things which are on their list. We're currently at 35. 80 would be good because that's 5 points better than the house that I'm leaving now. And it tells me on this piece the top 3 things to do. Something about the roof insulation, cavity wall insulation, floor insulation. There are even some numbers there to say what the indicative cost might be and how much I would actually save over 3 years in each case. You've seen lots, well, I think most of you will have seen lots and lots of EPC, so none of this is exactly new to you. Right, let's see if I can. Right, there we go. We should have got another bit of the same EPC. I'm hoping you've got a picture, which has got a long list of things to do, and for each thing it shows how the rating would improve if you did that until right at the bottom you get to C80. And you'll see that in the best, it follows the best practice, and it does a whole lot of things improving the fabric, and then down at the bottom it offers solar water heating and photovoltaic panels. Now, to get there, it seems that I need to approach 6 or 7 specialist trades and get quotes and work out their sequence of operation and spend a significant part of my life running the job. Now, this is currently delayed due to lockdown anyway, just at the basic level that the agent has got the key and nobody can go and get the quotations done. But there's an earlier question really, which is how do I actually validate this EPC? Are its choices the right ones? Now, okay, I've had a full professional survey done and the surveyor did it with this EPC in his hand. And it turns out that the EPC wrongly assumed that there was no cavity wall insulation, which is good because the saving there pays for the cost of the survey. So looking at the figures here, it seems as though I could get something near to AC down here. by spending about £8,000. Now, personally, I think I'll be lucky to get away with £10,000. If it was £10,000, that would give me a 10-year payback if I was worried about paybacks. By which time I'd probably be thinking about buying my second new kitchen, which rather underlines my point about the inconsistency of the public dialogue about payback periods. So let's see if we can stop share. That's what I will. Yes, I think I have stopped sharing. I think that's what we've achieved. That's good. Now, if it's a serious problem for a committed nerd like me, well, how are we going to get 700,000 people to buy into all this? And I mean buy into it. They're prepared to pay 10,000 or more for a kitchen. Why wouldn't they want to do that for this much more useful investment in the planet, useful investment for them, which leaves them with a permanently added value to the property that they've got, which a new kitchen is very much a wasting asset for. So I did some work on Google yesterday. I Googled kitchens. If I want a new kitchen, there are 170 sites on Google with offers galore to survey, to measure, to install, to clean up afterwards, to offer me a payment plan. Loft extensions, I didn't count the number, but it was a lot, just the same. Conservatories, yes, again and again. So what happens if I'm just an ordinary punter here? What happens if I Google retrofit coordinators? 2 pages of training courses being offered to people who want to be retrofit coordinators, but nobody actually offering me a service. What happens if I Google whole house approach? Lots of good people talking about it, but no one offering to do it for me. What happens if I Google upgrade my home's energy performance? A list of 10 handy tips, a list of 5 handy tips, but no one offering to do it for me. Now, please don't tell me there's no market for it. I'm a market for it. I want one. I want someone who can install insulation under a suspended floor without having to look at a video while they do it. I want someone I can trust to get things right that I know are important, but I don't know how to do myself. And I've just finished by saying, if your company already does this, why can't I find you on Google? So there you have it in a nutshell. For no fee, I have provided you all with an insight into a multi-billion-pound market with a 30-year time frame that your company is in an excellent place to exploit. So over to you. It's time to restart the green economy. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lord Stunnel. And I know that people will be champing at the bit to talk to you, because I know that some of our members do have retrofit coordinators, and I'm sure that Corgi are going to want to come back with you on some of the conversations you had around boilers and the gas sector. I'm just going to stop the recording now, and then I'll unmute everybody and we'll dive straight into the Q&A. But thank you so much for your insight. It was fascinating.